The quantum drive hummed at a frequency just below irritation, a steady thrum that vibrated through Mycel-Prime's root knot and into every drifting spore in its cloud. The seed ship drifted past the object with the serene patience of a gardener examining a weed. It was not a weed exactly. It was a station. Primitive alloys, iron and nickel smelted in zero gravity with no refinement. The thermal signature leaked from every seam like a wound that would not close. Crude construction, a species that never left its cradle properly. Mycel-Prime pulsed a query through its spore cloud. The drone technicians responded with confirming sense. The structure was inhabited. 712 thermal signatures, most clustered near the center where heat concentrated. The species inside was mammalian, bipedal, oxygen breathers. A classification flickered in Mycel-Prime's awareness. The species had a name filed in a council archive and marked for extinction. Humanity, deceased, 72 cycles ago. The station should have been empty. Mycel-Prime hung in the dark, its root knot pulsing slow and thoughtful. The archive was wrong then. A fragment survived. A seed pod that failed to die. Interesting. The galaxy did not tolerate such anomalies, but they were occasionally useful. A remnant species had no standing. It could not negotiate. It could only be absorbed or removed. The station's hull vibrated with a transmission. Mycel-Prime tasted the signal with chemical receptors along its tendrils. A voice, crackling through static, strained through a translator that mangled the tonal precision of the Sporewind language. The mammal introduced itself as a representative. It spoke of humanity as a remnant. It used a word that meant continuity, persistence, the refusal to end. Mycel-Prime released a gentle scent of reassurance and authority. It offered cultivation. The terms were simple and generous. Surrender to the Sporewind ecosystem. Become part of the garden. The humans would survive not as a separate species, but as integrated tissue within a larger whole. They would serve. They would be fed. They would not die. The human voice returned. Flat, no anger, no fear, just a simple refusal. No. Mycel-Prime's spore cloud pulsed with confusion. A rootless species had no leverage. It had no infrastructure, no industry, no diplomatic standing. It could not trade. It could not ally. It could only be absorbed or removed. The human had been given a choice, and it had chosen removal. That was not how negotiation worked. Mycel-Prime considered the thermal signatures again. 712 lives. A small investment. The seed ship carried a single kinetic slug in its launch bay, a needle of dense alloy intended for clearing debris from cultivation lanes. It would be sufficient. Mycel-Prime ordered the pruning. The drone technicians clicked in acknowledgement. The slug launched. No sound in vacuum. Only a silent flash as the projectile crossed the gap and struck the station's central hub. The impact should have been clean. The hull should have ruptured, atmosphere vented, the thermal signatures extinguished one by one. The station did not rupture. A grid of energy flickered across the surface, weak and inefficient, mining lasers, salvaged point defense from old cargo haulers. The grid fired back, a spray of concentrated light that barely kissed the seed ship's shields. It was pathetic. It was also unexpected. Mycel-Prime tasted the chemical tang of its own surprise. Acidic, sharp. The drone technicians shifted in their alcoves, uncertain. A ship emerged from behind a moon. It was the ugliest vessel Mycel-Prime had ever laid thermal receptors on, asymmetrical. An asteroid hull wrapped in metal that looked salvaged from different vessels, welded together with visible seams. It hung in the dark like a creature that had been assembled from the dead parts of other things. The living metal ribs pulsed with a slow heartbeat, visible even at this range. The vessel moved with a strange grace, like a wounded animal that had learned to compensate for its injuries. The kinetic slug struck it. The impact was clean. The hull buckled, atmosphere vented in a white plume that froze instantly. The ship spun wildly, its axis tumbling end over end. Internal lights flickered and died. Then the lights came back. The ship stabilized. Its frame groaned, a low sound transmitted through the quantum link like the complaint of an injured thing. Hull plates that had buckled were flowing back into place. The living metal, it was healing. The ship reoriented, its weapons array locking toward the seed ship. It should have been dead. The crew should have been dead. Mycel-Prime released a cloud of confusion pheromone before it could stop itself. The air turned sharp and metallic. The drone technicians recoiled. This organism refused to die correctly. That was not courage. Courage was a choice. This was something biological, something hardwired at a level so deep that the creature could not choose otherwise. The human ship was still coming closer, not running, not retreating, accelerating. Mycel-Prime had seen many species. It had absorbed dozens into the garden. It had pruned hundreds that refused. Every species had a threshold. Every species had a point where survival calculus overrode aggression. The humans did not seem to have that point. The human ship's weapons charged. Mycel-Prime could taste the energy building, raw and inefficient, converted from a reactor that was probably held together with hope and rivets. The weapons would not penetrate the seed ship's shields. They would scratch the paint. They would accomplish nothing. But the ship was still coming. Mycel-Prime's root knot tightened. It did not understand. The humans had nothing to gain. They could not win this engagement. They would die for no tactical advantage. And yet the ship accelerated. The station behind them was repairing itself. The thermal signatures were still there. 712, still alive, still refusing. Mycel-Prime ordered the seed ship to retreat. The quantum drive spun up, the hum rising to a pitch that flattened the drone technicians against their alcoves. The seed ship fled. But Mycel-Prime watched the human vessel on the sensors. It was chasing, not fast enough to catch but accelerating, trying anyway. Mycel-Prime released another confusion pheromone. The air was thick with it now. The drone technicians were secreting distress compounds. This was wrong. This was a failure of understanding. The galaxy operated on survival logic. Force met force. Risk met reward. The humans did not follow that logic. They did not stop. They did not break. They did not do what they were supposed to do. Mycel-Prime watched the human ship shrink on the sensors as the quantum drive opened the gap. The vessel was still accelerating, still pursuing. It was not running away. It was coming closer. And for the first time in its existence, Mycel-Prime did not know what to do. The bridge of the Yarrow stand smelled of ozone and cold metal and something else, something chemical that clung to the back of the throat. Ansel Yarrow stood at the center of it, his left hand pressed flat against a console to stop the trembling. The tremor wanted to crawl up his arm. He did not let it. The tactical display showed two icons. One was the Sporewind seed ship, massive and pulsing with bioluminescent warmth. The other was new. A slim curve of polished hull, neutral markings, council design, no weapons visible, no shields raised. The hail came through on standard diplomatic frequencies. Yarrow listened to the voice, smooth, measured, a slight harmonic undertone that suggested a translator working at the edge of its range. The speaker identified itself as Resonance Speaker Volume of the Scarath delegation attached to the Galactic Council. It demanded a ceasefire. It demanded both parties stand down under Council authority. Mycel-Prime did not respond. The display showed the seed ship's weapon systems cycling, not targeting Volume, not yet. The Sporewind had classified the Council vessel as a non-threat, a nuisance to be ignored until the primary work was done. Yarrow made his decision in the space between two heartbeats. He turned to the helm, a young woman with a scar running from her temple to her jaw. She met his eyes without flinching. "Bring us alongside the Council vessel," he said. "Full approach vector, direct line." She did not question him. Her hands moved across the console, and the Yarrow's stand groaned as its thrusters fired. The ship was not built for grace. It was an asteroid wrapped in living metal, a scarred and ugly thing that flew like a thrown rock. The hull plates had been salvaged from 3 different stations and a derelict freighter. They did not match. They did not need to match. They only needed to hold. A warning light flashed on the damage control board. Yarrow did not look at it. Another impact hit the aft section. The deck surged beneath his feet. Red emergency lighting flooded the bridge. An alarm began to pulse, low and rhythmic, and the hiss of escaping atmosphere came through the sealed bridge door. Thin, high, a sound like something dying. The crew did not move from their stations. Yarrow watched the distance to Volu's vessel shrink. The Council ship was holding position, watching. The sleek hull caught the distant star's light and threw it back in a clean gleam that the Yarrow's stand could never match. He opened a private channel, point to point. No encryption he trusted, but the Sporewind did not intercept human signals the same way. They heard in chemicals and thermal shifts. Radio was outside their sensory range. Resonance Speaker Volume, my name is Ansel Yarrow. I speak for the human remnant. He paused. The tremor in his hand wanted to shake his voice. He pressed his palm harder against the console until the bones ached. I am offering you a deal. Resources and protection for our colony in exchange for military service against the Sporewind. The silence stretched. 4 seconds. 5. The translator hummed, processing his words, and then Volu's voice came back. There was something in it, not quite surprise, curiosity, perhaps. The kind of interest a biologist might show when a specimen did something unexpected. You are a pre-FTL species, Volu said. Your homeworld is destroyed, your population is negligible, you have no standing in galactic law and no leverage in negotiation, and you are offering to fight for us. Yes, against the Sporewind Trade Prince, which has the resources to sterilize this entire system. Yes. Another pause, longer this time. Yarrow could imagine what Volu was thinking, the absurdity of it, a dead species clinging to the edge of existence dictating terms to the Council. But Volu was still watching. The tactical display updated. The Yarrow's stand had taken structural damage to the starboard habitat ring, 3 sections depressurized. The living metal was flowing to seal the breaches, but it was slow. The ship was leaking air and coolant and heat into the void. Yarrow ordered a visual feed opened. He wanted Volu to see them. The camera showed the bridge in its red-lit ugliness, the crew at their stations, the scar-faced helmsman with her hands steady on the controls, the damage control officer calling out numbers in a flat, practiced voice, the ozone smell and the cold and the sound of air bleeding out through a crack that was still sealing. Yarrow stood at the center of it all, gaunt, gray-streaked, his left hand shaking against the console, his eyes fixed on the camera. He spoke again. We are the only weapon you need to buy. Our world is gone. We have nothing left to lose. Volu's answer did not come through words. The visual feed showed the Council vessel, a small camera on its hull angled toward the Yarrow's stand. Volu could see what the humans looked like, could see the ship that should have been dead 3 impacts ago, could see a species that had been cataloged as extinct for 72 cycles still breathing, still fighting, still advancing. The feed held for a long moment. Then Volu's voice returned. The harmonic undertone was gone. The translator was working clean now with no processing lag. I am making a decision, Volu said. I will need support. The line went silent. Yarrow did not move. The bridge crew waited. The red lights continued to pulse. The hiss of escaping atmosphere had faded to a whisper. The living metal had nearly finished its work. Volu's voice came back. The Council will be skeptical. The Scarath delegation will face political consequences, and the Sporewind will consider this an act of war. Yarrow said nothing. I agree to your deal. The bridge stayed silent. No one cheered. No one breathed out. The scar-faced helmsman looked at Yarrow and he gave her a single nod. She adjusted the approach vector. The Yarrow's stand continued its advance. Volu watched from the Council vessel. The human ship was still burning, still leaking, still coming. The sleek hull of the Council vessel sat motionless against the stars, and the Yarrow's stand grew larger in its cameras. Volu opened a second channel. This one went to the Galactic Council. The message was short. The tone was not professional anymore. It said, I have initiated contact with a species that should not exist. I am bringing them in. Prepare for classification review. And in the silence that followed, Volu looked at the human ship one more time. The fire along its hull had spread. The living metal was bleeding to seal a fresh breach. The crew was still at their stations. None of them had stopped. None of them had run. The Council vessel began to move, not away, alongside. The command chamber breathed, warm and wet and alive. Moisture beaded on every surface, condensing from the perfumed air that Mycel-Prime kept thick enough to taste. The central knot of root tissue pulsed gently, drawing in the chemical signatures of its domain. All was in order. All was growing. Then the hull shuddered. Not the vibration of a kinetic strike. Something smaller, closer. Mycel-Prime extended sensory tendrils into the ship's circulatory system. The internal sensors were blind in Section 7, then Section 6. The tremors moved through the hull like a burrowing thing, advancing section by section toward the command chamber. Boarding action. Mycel-Prime released a query pulse. The drone defenders responded with confirmation of a breach. The humans had cut through hull alloy from the outside. They crossed hard vacuum without full environmental seals, only sealed masks and thermal blankets wrapped around their bodies. That should not have been possible. Exposure to vacuum caused cellular rupture in most oxygen breathers within moments. Yet the thermal signatures moved steadily through the corridor, 7 points of heat advancing in formation. They were coming here. Mycel-Prime pulsed an order to the drone defenders. Release the fear moss into the breach sections. The biotic compound would fill the corridor with spores that triggered overwhelming panic in any nervous system. It had worked on every species the Sporewind had ever encountered. The Scareth had surrendered an entire colony moon to the moss once. The memory was pleasant, a warm chemical satisfaction. The vents opened. The fog rolled forward, pale green and cloying. It clung to surfaces and thickened in the low gravity. Mycel-Prime extended its awareness into the corridor to observe the results. The humans walked into the cloud. They did not slow. Their thermal signatures remained steady. No spike in heart rate. No elevation of stress hormones. One of them stumbled, but only because the floor had become slick with condensation. The fog touched their exposed skin and it began to blister. Their eyes wept red tears where the spores found the soft tissue of the cornea. They did not scream. They did not retreat. They raised weapons and continued moving forward. Mycel-Prime released a confusion pulse into the air. This was wrong. This did not align with any data in its genetic memory. The fear moss should have triggered a cascade of neural panic that caused paralysis or flight. Every species had a fear response. It was a fundamental biological constant. Fear preceded survival. You could not survive without fear to guide you away from what would kill you. The humans did not have it. They did not feel afraid. One of them entered visual range. A male, young by human standards, broad-shouldered and bleeding from a dozen small burns where the moss had touched his cheeks and neck. He held a weapon in his right hand. His left arm was gone below the elbow. A drone defender had sprayed a caustic compound that dissolved organic tissue on contact. The arm should have been a catastrophic wound. Blood loss alone should have rendered him unconscious within minutes. He jammed a thermal lance into the stump. The smell of burning flesh and scorched moss filled the corridor, a combination that Mycel-Prime's sensory array reported in precise chemical detail. The human never stopped firing his sidearm while he did it. He sealed the wound with direct heat to the exposed tissue, and he did not flinch. His biosignatures showed only adrenaline and endorphins. No fear hormones. None, not a trace. Mycel-Prime had existed for 412 cycles. It had catalogued 11,000 sentient species. It had never encountered one that did not produce fear hormones under direct threat of death. The humans reached the command chamber door. They cut through it with a tool that spat molten metal. Mycel-Prime watched them enter, 7 of them. The one-armed one was in front. He walked through the rich, damp air of the chamber and looked at the central throne. The empty central throne. Mycel-Prime was already moving toward the escape pod bay. It had triggered the self-destruct sequence before they breached the inner door. The hull was vibrating now with a slow, rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat counting down to 0. It had never retreated from anything. In its entire existence across hundreds of worlds, it had never once fled. The concept was alien. Sporewind did not retreat. They cultivated. They pruned. They harvested. They did not run. They ran now. The escape pod sealed around Mycel-Prime's central knot. The launch kicked hard, a crushing acceleration that pressed the root tissue against the pod's inner wall. Through the viewport, Mycel-Prime watched its own ship recede, a dark shape against the stars. It tried to process what had just happened. The math refused to balance. The human's voice came through the open channel, the one-armed one. He was speaking into his comm unit. His voice was steady, not ragged, not breathless, steady. The target is gone, but we took their garden. Mycel-Prime heard this as it drifted away. The words settled into its chemical processing centers and sat there insoluble. They could not be metabolized into meaning. The humans did not just survive the attack. They walked through a weapon designed to paralyze their minds. They lost a limb and did not stop. They burned their own flesh shut and kept fighting. They used their own pain as fuel. They weaponized their own destruction. Mycel-Prime floated in the dark. The escape pod had no propulsion. A recovery beacon pulsed automatically, but help was cycles away. It had time to think, time to understand what it had encountered. It opened a broadcast channel to the Galactic Council. The frequency was standard. The encryption was public. It did not care who heard. Do not arm these creatures. Do not make treaties with them. They are not survivors. The words came out as a low-frequency hum laced with bitter chemical signatures. Mycel-Prime had never spoken these kinds of words. It had never had reason to. They are a plague that does not know when it has died. The channel went silent. The pod drifted. Somewhere in the void, the pulse of the self-destruct counted down to 0, and behind it, Mycel-Prime's ship became a cloud of debris and frozen spores. But the humans were still there, and they had taken the garden. The mediation station smelled of nothing. Resonance speaker Volume found the absence offensive. Every environment carried information, thermal gradients, organic residue, the chemical signature of life. This room had been scrubbed clean of all of it. Sterile filters hummed in the walls. The air tasted like polished metal. Volume tapped its claws against the table in a slow, deliberate sequence. 2, 4, 3. The pattern helped it think. Across the table, Mycel-Prime hung suspended in its biofield containment. The reddish-brown root knot pulsed with visible agitation. Its spore cloud flattened against the invisible barrier, pressing outward like a creature trying to escape. The hum it emitted registered at a frequency Volume's species associated with distress. Beside it, the human sat motionless. Ansel Yarrow had refused the medical cot. He sat upright in a standard council chair, his bandaged hands resting on his thighs. His face showed 14 separate wounds Volume had counted during the initial scan, lacerations, burns, something that looked like frost damage across his left cheek. The human's eyes were open but distant. He watched the Sporewind with the patience of something that had already accepted its own death. Volume flattened its palms against the table's surface. "This station operates under council neutrality protocols," Volume said. The voice came out as a modulated hiss, calibrated for translation. "No weapons, no hostile action. Both parties have agreed to these terms." Mycel-Prime's hum sharpened. The spore cloud surged. "Remove the anomaly," Mycel-Prime said. The translation system rendered its low-frequency pulses as flat, clipped words. "This organism is a biological contamination. It should not exist. Its presence violates the ecological order of every system it touches." Yarrow did not respond. He simply watched. Volume turned its head, the membrane sliding across its eye in a slow blink. "The humans have offered a counter-proposal." "A buffer," Yarrow said. His voice was rough, scraped raw by vacuum exposure. "A barren moon system on the periphery of Sporewind territory. 4 rocks, no atmosphere, no biological value. We occupy it. We hold it against any external force. We do not expand beyond it." Mycel-Prime's root knot contracted. "Why do you want to live?" The question hung in the sterile air. Yarrow's left hand trembled. He did not try to stop it. "Your root is gone," Mycel-Prime continued. "You are severed from your origin. There is no soil for you, no ecosystem, no purpose. Why do you continue?" Volume watched the human's face. It had studied enough species to recognize the micro-expressions of grief, anger, calculation. Yarrow showed none of these. His face was a wall. "Because we are still breathing," Yarrow said. The answer was too simple. Volume knew it was a deflection. Yarrow shifted in his chair. "I want to use the memory extractor." Volume's claws stopped mid-tap. "That is not advisable," Volume said. The words came out sharper than intended. "The process causes neurological damage, short-term memory degradation, persistent pain cycles. I cannot recommend it for any subject." "It is not a recommendation," Yarrow said. "It is a request." Mycel-Prime's spore cloud stilled. The shift was immediate from agitation to something Volume could not immediately identify: curiosity, interest. "You would submit to extraction," Mycel-Prime said. "I volunteer," Yarrow said. "My mind, my memories, you want to understand what we are. This is the fastest way." Volume stood. The motion drew both beings' attention. "Mediation does not require self-harm," Volume said, its tail lashed once against the floor. "There are other methods: negotiation, documentation, exchange of records." "We do not have records," Yarrow said. "Earth is gone, the Mars colony is gone, everything we had burned with them." He looked at Mycel-Prime. "You need to understand," Yarrow said. "We need to understand each other. You think we are a disease. We think you are an enemy that killed our entire species without a word. Someone has to bridge that gap. I am volunteering." Volume wanted to refuse. The protocols allowed it. The human was technically under Volume's protection during mediation. But Volume looked at Yarrow's face again. The human was not afraid. That was the detail that stopped Volume's objection cold. Yarrow showed no fear of the procedure. He showed no fear of the pain. He showed no fear of losing pieces of his own mind. He simply sat there, broken and bandaged, and offered himself. Mycel-Prime extended a tendril through the biofield. The limb was thin and bioluminescent, tipped with a hooked calyx that dripped a milky enzyme, the memory extractor. Value had seen it used before, on criminals, on prisoners of war, on subjects who screamed before the tendril touched their skull. Yarrow leaned forward and presented the back of his head. The tendril touched. Yarrow's body went rigid, his jaw clenched. A low sound escaped his throat, not a scream, but something close. A vibration held back by sheer force of will. The enzyme entered his skull. Mycel-Prime's spore cloud went dark. Value watched as the fungal entity's thermal signature fluctuated wildly. The memory extractor worked both ways. The subject's memories flowed into the Sporewind's consciousness. Every sensation, every emotion, every detail of sensory input. Mycel-Prime was experiencing the destruction of Earth. Value could not see the memories, but it could read the Sporewind's chemical emissions like a text. The distress pheromones spiked. The bioluminescence along the tendril flickered and dimmed. Heat, the memory of heat, burning cities, oceans boiling, the atmosphere stripping away in long, luminous ribbons. Silence, the memory of silence after the final broadcasts ended. Radio channels going dark one by one. The last voice from Earth, a woman's voice, reciting coordinates that no one would ever use. Loss, the memory of loss. Faces Yarrow had known, parents, siblings, a child. A world of 8 billion reduced to thermal echoes in a single hour. Value's claws began tapping again. The pattern was random, it did not notice. Mycel-Prime's hum dropped to a frequency Value had never heard from the species before. A deep, resonant vibration, the sound of something fundamental being questioned. The tendril withdrew. Yarrow slumped forward, his hands caught the table edge. His breathing was ragged. A droplet of blood ran from his left nostril and fell onto the clean, sterile surface. The silence that followed was absolute. Mycel-Prime's spore cloud pulsed slowly. One pulse, a pause, another. "You saw your world die," Mycel-Prime said. The translation system rendered the words flat, but the underlying hum carried something else. Something Value could not name. "And you did not stop." Yarrow wiped the blood from his lip. His hand trembled violently. "We kept living," Yarrow said. "That is all we know how to do." The Sporewind's root knot contracted, expanded, contracted again. The motion was slow, rhythmic, like a heart learning to beat after a long stillness. Value looked between them. The fungal entity that had spent 412 cycles cultivating systems, seeding worlds, building an empire of quiet biological order. And the human remnant that had spent 72 cycles drifting in the dark, carrying nothing but grief and the instinct to continue. Mycel-Prime's hum shifted. "The offer is accepted." Yarrow looked up. "The moon system," Mycel-Prime said. "You may occupy it, you will hold the perimeter, you will not expand. In exchange, we will not prune you." Yarrow nodded, he did not thank them. Value began drafting the official mediation closeout. The terms were clear. The civil war between the Sporewind and the Council factions would end. The humans would be contained. But Value's claws kept tapping. Containment assumed something could be contained. Value looked at Yarrow. The human was already standing, already moving toward the door, already planning the next move. His species had faced extinction and refused to die. They had lost everything and kept breathing. The Council had mediated hundreds of conflicts. It had never mediated a species that had already survived its own end. Value filed the closeout report and added a private note to its personal archive, a warning in the margin. "The variable is not controlled. The variable cannot be controlled." It looked at the empty mediation room, the sterile air, the clean table, the single droplet of human blood that had already dried into a dark, fixed point. Something had changed. Value did not know if it was a cure or a poison. But it knew one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy had not seen the last of them. The gray dust crunched under Ansel Yarrow's boots. It was the only sound inside the dome, that and his own breath. The habitat was a flimsy thing, a bubble of reinforced polymer standing on the frozen surface of a moon that had no name. Outside, vacuum. Inside, just a thin barrier and two species who had tried to kill each other. Mycel-Prime hovered in the center of the dome. Its central knot of reddish-brown root tissue pulsed slowly. The iridescent spore cloud around it drifted in a pattern that seemed deliberate, almost ceremonial. The air carried a sharp chemical scent, clean, like ozone after a storm. That was respect Yarrow had learned. The Sporewind released it when they encountered something they could not categorize. You could call it progress. Mycel-Prime spoke first. The low-frequency hum vibrated through the dome floor, through Yarrow's boots, up into his chest. The translation unit on his collar rendered it into flat, toneless words. I miscalculated. Yarrow waited. His left hand trembled against his thigh. The cold was seeping through the floor panels, and the tremor was worse in low temperatures. He did not reach for his pocket. He let it shake. Mycel-Prime continued. I underestimated the will of a rootless species. You have no home world, you have no soil, you have no inheritance, yet you fight as though every patch of ground is sacred. Yarrow looked at the gray dust beneath his feet. It was fine and dry, the consistency of ash. It looked like the pictures of the old lunar colonies on Earth, the ones they had shown in the archives before the attack, white domes on a gray plain, people walking in suits, a home built on a graveyard. He said nothing, the silence stretched. The Sporewind respected silence, they read it as patience. You are not a garden, Mycel-Prime said. Its spore cloud contracted, then expanded. You are a wall, hard and unyielding. I did not recognize this because I have never encountered a wall that moved, that grew, that bled and continued. Yarrow let the words settle. Then he spoke. His voice was rough from the recycled air, from the exhaustion that lived in his bones now. We will occupy this moon. We will not expand aggressively. We will act as a buffer between your trade routes and any threat that comes from the outer systems. Mycel-Prime's not pulsed once. This is acceptable. We will build here. We will grow food in the domes. We will drill for water in the ice below. We will not interfere with your vessels unless they fire on us first. This is also acceptable. Yarrow took a breath. The cold air tasted like nothing. And we will defend this place. That is the only promise we make. We will not promise peace. We will not promise to be good neighbors. We will promise to hold this ground until we cannot hold it anymore. Mycel-Prime was silent for a long moment. The spore cloud stilled completely. Then it drifted forward, and a single tendril extended from the central knot. It was pale and dry-looking, like old bark, but it moved with a liquid grace that seemed wrong for something so brittle. You cannot negotiate with a solar flare, Mycel-Prime said. You build a shelter, you cannot reason with a rock slide, you avoid its path. I have learned this lesson. You are a force of nature. I will not try to cultivate you. I will build around you. Yarrow looked at the tendril. It hovered in the air between them. The deal was formal now, sealed in the way of the Sporewind. Touch meant contract. Contact meant acceptance. He reached out with his bare hand. The tremor was worse now. His fingers shook as they closed around the tendril. It was cool, dry. The texture of a truce between two predators who had learned to respect each other's teeth. Yarrow realized in that moment that he had just sold humanity's future as a weapon. He had walked into this dome and offered a species of seed traders a deal built on fear. We will fight. We will die. We will kill anything that comes near us. And that was the only thing they could sell, not their technology, not their culture, not their history, just their willingness to break. He did not let go of the tendril. He held it for a count of 5 heartbeats, then released. Mycel-Prime withdrew its tendril and pulsed a low hum that the translator rendered as approval. The treaty is sealed. Your engineers may begin construction. I will instruct my vessels to maintain a distance of 3 standard units from this zone. Yarrow nodded. He did not say thank you. There was nothing to thank for. Mycel-Prime turned and drifted toward the airlock. The spore cloud followed, a slow swirl of light in the pale dome light. It paused at the threshold. There is one thing I do not understand, Mycel-Prime said. Yarrow waited. Why do you want to live? You have nothing left, no home, no history that matters to the galaxy. You are a severed thing still twitching. What drives you to cling to this empty rock and call it survival? Yarrow looked down at his trembling hand. He thought about Callisto Station, the flash, the silence, the bodies floating in the void. He thought about the chrono shard in the flagship's vault, the frozen image of Earth burning, the last picture of a world that had held 8 billion people. He looked up at the spore cloud. Because we still breathe, he said. That's enough. Mycel-Prime pulsed again. The translation unit remained silent. Then the airlock cycled open, and the spore cloud drifted out into the vacuum. Yarrow stood alone in the dome. The cold was seeping through the soles of his boots. He could feel it in his joints, in the old injury in his spine, in the hand that would not stop shaking. He heard footsteps behind him. He did not turn. "It's done," he said. Oren Feldspar walked up beside him. The young colonist's face was red from the cold. His jaw was set. He carried a tablet in one hand. "The engineers are unpacking the beacon," Oren said. "They want to know if they should set it up now or wait for the dome to pressurize fully." Yarrow closed his eyes. The void beacon, the ancient device they had found drifting in the outer belt. The thing that could send a signal across dimensions to listeners no living species had ever seen. It was supposed to be a last resort, a desperate gamble, a final scream into the dark. But he had bought humanity time now. Not peace, not safety, time. Time to build, time to grow, time to become something that could not be pruned away. "Set it up now," Yarrow said. Oren paused. "We don't know who's listening." "I know. It could bring anything. It could bring the same ones who killed Earth." Yarrow opened his eyes. He turned to look at the transport container being dragged across the gray dust. The living metal ribs of the container pulsed with a slow heartbeat, a rhythm that matched the flagship anchored in orbit above. "Then we'll be ready when they come," he said. Oren nodded once. He tapped the tablet and gave the order. The engineers moved. The container opened. The void beacon was a skeletal frame of dark metal surrounding a core of absolute blackness. It absorbed light. It absorbed sound. Looking at it made Yarrow's eyes ache, like staring into a hole in reality. They set it on the gray dust. They connected the power leads. They stepped back. The core pulsed. A single pulse. A signal sent out into the dark. No encryption, no targeting, just a call to anyone, to anything, to whatever lived between the dimensions. Yarrow watched it pulse again. He did not know who would answer. He did not know if the answer would come in days or years or centuries. He only knew that he had bought humanity time. And time was the one thing they had never had enough of. The beacon pulsed a third time. The light in the core flickered, and then it settled into a steady, waiting glow. Yarrow turned away from it. He looked out through the dome's transparent wall at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council, the Sporewind, the Scarath, the small and terrible creatures of a universe that had not asked for them. And somewhere out there, the ones who had killed Earth. The beacon pulsed behind him. He did not turn around. The recycled air tasted like cold metal and something else, something sweet. Oren Feldspar stopped mid-stride in the maintenance tunnel. The corridor stretched ahead, rough-hewn from the moon's native rock, lit by emergency strips that hummed at a frequency just below discomfort. He tilted his head and breathed again. There it was, a cloying rot, thick and floral, layered over the usual scent of ozone and filtered waste. He ran his thumb along the scar on his jaw and moved forward. The tunnel curved left, then opened into a junction where three conduits met. A dark corner, damp. The rock here was veined with something pale and soft. Fungus, not the gray-green growth that sometimes bloomed in the condensation traps. This was white, almost luminous, with thin filaments that spread across the stone like veins on a closed eye. It pulsed, barely, a slow rhythm that matched nothing mechanical. Oren keyed his wrist calm. "Command, this is Feldspar, Maintenance Junction 7 Delta. I have a biological anomaly." The response came static-scratched. "Describe." "White filament growth. Estimated spread 2 meters. It smells like the trade prints." A pause, then the voice again, tighter now. "Stand by, do not approach." Oren stood by. He did not approach. But he watched the filaments pulse, and he counted the seconds between each beat, and he did not like what the pattern suggested. The council drone arrived 17 minutes later. It was a Scarath design, a floating sphere of polished carapace with sensory tendrils that dripped a faintly luminescent fluid. It hovered at the junction's center and extended a single tendril toward the fungus. The contact was instant. The drone's carapace flickered through 3 color shifts in under a second. Its speaker emitted a tone that translated as surprise, then alarm. "Identification complete," the drone announced. Its voice was flat, translated through a universal modulator. "This is a Sporewind monitoring seed pod, genetically tagged to Mycel-Prime's personal lineage. It has been transmitting for approximately 71 hours. Oren's stomach went cold. Transmitting what? Thermal signatures, atmospheric composition, physiological data from any organism within 12 meters of its root system. The drone retracted its tendril. "This is a surveillance device. It is a violation of the treaty." "Get me Yarrow," Oren said. But the comm was already open. The colony's command channel erupted in overlapping voices. Someone was shouting about a medical emergency in Habitat 2. Orin ran. The Habitat module was a converted cargo bay, still lined with the original insulation panels. The colonists had painted the walls a soft blue, trying to make it feel like somewhere else, somewhere with sky. The blue did not matter now. A woman lay on a cot. Her name was Esther Vale. She was 32 years old, a geologist who had mapped half the moon's subsurface ice deposits in the first month. She had a husband and a child. She was still breathing. A thin tendril grew from the base of her spine. It was pale, almost translucent, and it disappeared into the mattress beneath her. Her eyes were closed. Her lips moved sometimes, forming words that made no sound. She was dreaming. Orin stopped at the door. A medic knelt beside her, gloves already on, a laser scalpel in hand. The medic looked up. "She's stable, vitals are normal, but we can't wake her." "Is the tendril growing?" "Slowly, it's embedded in her nervous system. If we cut it wrong, she'll lose motor function below the waist. Maybe worse." Orin heard footsteps behind him. Heavy, measured, he turned. Ansel Yarrow stood in the corridor, his gray-streaked hair disheveled, his left hand shaking at his side. His eyes moved from Esther to the tendril to Orin's face. He took it all in without speaking. "The Council is blaming the Sporewind," Yarrow said. His voice was flat. "The Sporewind is blaming the Council. They are both accusing each other of planting the seed pod before the treaty was signed." "Does it matter?" Yarrow's gaze held. "No." He turned to the medic. "Remove it carefully, save her if you can." Then he walked to the Habitat's wall panel and pressed his palm against the living metal surface. The metal rippled under his touch. A low hum began, deep and resonant, like a heartbeat moving through stone. "Full quarantine," Yarrow said. The words were quiet. The comm system carried them to every speaker in the colony. "All non-essential movement stops. Sealed sections locked down. I am activating the hull defenses." The wall began to shift. Orin watched as the living metal flowed like liquid, crawling across the rock, extruding new surfaces and sealing old gaps. It pulsed with the same slow rhythm he had seen in the fungus. The same rhythm. He felt the corridor narrow around him. New anchor was closing like a fist. "Sir," Orin said, "Mycel-Prime's seed pod was here for 71 hours. That means it was planted before the treaty was even ratified." Yarrow did not turn around. "I know." "Then this was never a real peace." "No." The living metal sealed the final gap. The Habitat's entrance became a solid wall of pulsing, vein-threaded alloy. The air grew heavier. The hum deepened. Esther Vale opened her eyes. They were not her eyes. They were filmed over with a pale membrane, and they did not blink. Her mouth opened, and a sound came out that was not quite a voice. It was a low hum, translated into vibration, shaped into words by a throat that had never learned human speech. "You occupy a world that was promised to us." The hum filled the room. Orin's teeth ached. "This is not over, Yarrow." Esther's body went limp. Her eyes closed. The medic moved forward, laser scalpel already glowing. The hum faded. Orin stood in the silence. He could feel the living metal behind him pressing against his back. The corridor was narrower than before. The walls were alive, and they were locked. He looked at Yarrow. The man's face showed nothing. No surprise, no anger, no grief. Just the hollow patience of someone who had already accepted that hope was a debt that came due. "Sir," Orin said, "what do we do now?" Yarrow's hand trembled. He pressed it against his thigh to still it. "We wait," he said. "We see what comes through the door." The alarm sounded 40 seconds later. The view screen in the command center flickered to life. Orin reached it just in time to see the tactical display update. 11 new icons, then 23, then 40. Sporewind ships. They were jumping into the system one after another, emerging from the void in blooms of distorted light. Siege ships, harvesters, warpods with hulls that looked like armored fruit. They arranged themselves in a spreading formation, slow and deliberate, like a gardener surveying a neglected bed. The Civil War had found a new front, and humanity was the battlefield. Orin stared at the screen. The ships kept coming. He did not count past 60. Behind him, someone whispered a prayer. Someone else began to cry. Yarrow walked past them both. He sat down in the command chair, the old creaking frame accepting his weight, and he rested his shaking hand on the armrest. "Open a channel," he said. No one moved. Open a channel to Mycel-Prime. The comm operator's fingers danced across the panel. Static filled the room. Then a low hum, steady and patient, and a voice that was not quite a voice. "I am here, Yarrow." Yarrow leaned forward. His voice was calm, controlled. The voice of a man who had already given everything and found it was not enough. "You planted a seed pod before the treaty was signed. You violated the agreement before the ink was dry, so let me be very clear about what happens next." The hum waited. "You brought 60 ships to a moon with a population of 4,000. You think that is overwhelming force. You think we will kneel." Yarrow's hand stopped trembling. "We are the species that watched our homeworld burn and kept breathing. We are the species that walked through your fear moss with our skin peeling off and did not stop. We are the species that cauterized our own wounds with thermal lances because we had nothing else left." He stood. "You do not get to frighten us. You do not get to intimidate us. You started a war with a species that has already lost everything. We have nothing left to lose. Do you understand what that means?" The hum changed, a different note, lower. "I understand," Mycel-Prime said. "I am counting on it." The channel went dead. Oren stood in the silence. The view screen showed 60 Sporewind ships, arrayed in perfect formation, waiting for nothing. He looked at Yarrow. The man's hand was trembling again. The bridge of the Yarrow's stand hummed with a sound that was not mechanical. The living metal walls breathed in a slow cycle. They expanded and contracted like a lung. Every surface pulsed with a dim amber light. The rhythm matched a heartbeat too slow for a human but too fast for a ship. Ansel Yarrow stood at the center of it. His good hand gripped a support strut. The metal felt warm. It felt alive. It recognized him as part of the hull now. He was a cell in a larger body that could feel pain and anger and the cold of the void. The tactical display floated before him. It was a sphere of light filled with screaming icons. The Sporewind fleet had moved. 23 seed ships now formed a crescent around the frozen moon. The Council fleet held position on the far side. 7 vessels of polished biosteel and crystal. The humans sat between them, a splinter of rock and living metal that belonged nowhere. Mycel-Prime's voice filled the bridge. It came from the walls themselves. It came from the air. It vibrated through the deck plates. The Sporewind had learned to speak through the human ship's integrated systems. It used every channel at once. "The moon is ours by right of cultivation. We seeded this system. We warmed its core. We prepared its soil for harvest. The human fortress violates the natural order of growth." Yarrow did not answer immediately. He let the silence stretch. His left hand trembled against the strut. The tremor traveled up his arm in waves. The injury from Callisto had never healed. It probably never would. Resonance speaker Volu's voice cut through from the Council channel, thin and precise. The static of a long-range relay accompanied it. "The treaty is valid. The humans occupy the moon under Council charter. They have submitted to the memory extractor. They have offered military service in exchange for protection. The legal framework is sound." "The legal framework is a weed," Mycel-Prime hummed. "I will tear it out." Yarrow raised his head. His voice was quiet, but the living metal carried it to every speaker on the bridge. "You will not." The tactical display flickered. The Sporewind ships shifted formation. They closed the crescent by a fraction. The Council vessels responded in kind. They spread into a defensive line. Oren Feldspar stood at the weapons station. His hand rested on a console that had grown from the floor. The metal had bonded to his palm. He did not seem to notice. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the display. "They are powering weapons," he said. "All 23 full charge cycle." Volu's voice rose. "Mycel-Prime, stand down. You cannot fire on a Council-protected installation. The political cost alone." "I can prune a rotten branch," Mycel-Prime said. "The tree will survive." Yarrow turned away from the display. He walked to the center of the bridge. A dark metal frame stood there, anchored to the floor. The void beacon. It looked like a cage built around nothing. A skeleton of struts surrounded a core of absolute blackness. The core drank the light from the room. He had kept it secret for 3 years. He had carried it from the outer belt. He had hidden it in the belly of a dead ship. He knew it would change everything if he used it. He placed his hand on the frame. The living metal recognized his intent. The walls tightened. The amber light deepened to red. "What are you doing?" Volu's voice cracked. "That device, any signal from that device, we do not know who listens. We do not know what it calls." "That is the point," Yarrow said. Mycel-Prime's hum turned sharp, a frequency that vibrated in the teeth. You would awaken the unknown, you would risk summoning forces beyond this galaxy. Yarrow did not answer. He pressed his hand against the beacon frame. The living metal screamed. The core pulsed. A wave of silence washed across the bridge. Every alarm fell quiet. The hum of the walls stopped. The amber light died. In the dark, Yarrow's voice was flat. I already have. The beacon flared. Light that had no color spilled from the core. It did not illuminate, it replaced. It erased the bridge, it erased the walls, it erased the ships beyond. For a single endless moment there was only the light, the silence, the feeling of being seen. Then the pulse passed. The bridge returned. The amber light flickered back to life. The alarms began again, discordant, urgent. The tactical display updated. 212 new icons, vessels of unknown configuration. They emerged from nothing. They came from the spaces between stars. They came from dimensions that should not have opened. Mycel-Prime's voice returned, stripped of its harmonic layers, reduced to a single flat note of awe. What have you done? Yarrow released the frame. His hand was shaking, his face was pale, but his eyes were steady. I bought us time, he said. The unknown ships held position. They did not attack, they did not communicate, they simply waited.